I was already feeling the cold bite of fear when I first woke up inside that cramped cell, light panels glaring above me in a sterile, bluish glow. The walls hummed with the steady energy coursing through this alien vessel. By then, I'd already pieced together a few facts. I wasn't on Earth anymore. Not that Earth was safe for me either, and I certainly wasn't being hosted by humans. I caught a glimpse of the ones who had captured me, tall, elegant figures with elongated limbs and iridescent eyes. Their uniforms were crisp, their technology far beyond anything I'd grown up around. And leading them was a female commander who exuded confidence, so thick you could almost taste it in the recycled air. Her posture, the subtle tilt of her chin, the way her glossy armor reflected the overhead lights, everything about her screamed predator. Yet, she looked at me as if I was the prey, small, weak, unremarkable. A human she believed had somehow stumbled into the wrong sector of space and gotten unlucky enough to cross her path. I remember lying there, ankles and wrists bound by something that felt like steel but was lighter and more flexible. I tested it with a quiet curiosity, rolling my wrists against the cuffs to see if there was any give. There wasn't. The cell itself was a featureless chamber. For walls, a bench protruding from the metal plating, and a faint hum in the corners that suggested force fields or advanced security measures. My captors were thorough. A part of me wondered if they had any idea who I really was, if they understood why I had come to this part of the galaxy, or if they simply saw me as yet another hapless wanderer trespassing on territory that didn't belong to him. For their sake, I hoped they didn't know, because if they had taken me seriously from the start, I might never have gotten the chance to unravel their secrets. Eventually, the silent tension in the cell gave way to the sound of a door sliding open. She stepped inside, wearing the same polished uniform I'd glimpsed earlier. I'd expected her features to look regal or imposing, and I wasn't disappointed. Her face was framed by metallic-like scales that ran along her cheekbones, an indication of her species, no doubt. Instead of hair, she had fine, silky quills that flowed backward, giving her a distinctly alien elegance. Her eyes, a deep jade color, focused on me with an almost clinical disdain. "You are awake," she said, her accent just barely noticeable. She spoke English better than some humans I'd met back on Earth. Good. I prefer my prisoners conscious when I question them. I tried to stretch as much as my restraints would allow, then shrugged. "I aim to please," I replied, "although your hospitality is lacking." I didn't even get a welcome drink. Her expression remained stony, but her mouth quirked infinitesimally, as if she couldn't decide whether to scowl or smirk. "Your name?" I considered lying, but if they'd done even a preliminary background check, they have my ID in some database. "My name is Darren," I said, forcing a hint of indifference in my voice. "And you are?" She didn't answer right away, which told me she was not used to being asked anything by her detainees. After a brief moment, she said, "Commander Valis Area of the Orth Squadron. You are accused of violating restricted space and possibly engaging in espionage against the Orth Alliance." "Espionage," I echoed. "That's a big word. You sure I look the part?" Her gaze slipped to my ragged clothing, a torn jacket, faded cargo pants, and boots that had seen better days. "You look like a vagrant," she admitted. "But appearances can be deceiving. Tell me how you managed to bypass our patrol routes and land in an Orth outpost unannounced." I shrugged again, letting the movement remain loose and casual, even though my heart pounded under my ribcage. "I was just passing through. Maybe your patrols aren't as thorough as you think." She took a half-step closer. The cell door hissed behind her, sealing us in. "I doubt that," she said simply. "We've captured plenty of your kind before. Smugglers, pirates, desperate criminals from Earth. Most of them cower. You, however, you're too calm. You don't even seem worried." I paused, letting that accusation hang in the air. My voice, when it came out, was quieter. "I know fear well enough, Commander," I said. "But I also know there's no point in acting terrified unless it'll do me some good." She studied me with a detached curiosity. "So you admit to being a smuggler, then?" "I admit nothing. But if it makes you feel better, call me whatever you want." My wrists ached in the cuffs, but I kept any discomfort off my face. Can I ask a question? Her eyes narrowed. You can ask. I'm not obligated to answer. Well, I said, cocking my head, why bother capturing me alive? If you think I'm a threat, I'm sure your laws might permit you to toss me out an airlock. Or maybe you prefer to toy with your food. A sharp flicker of anger crossed her features, and I realized I'd touched a nerve. We don't harm prisoners without reason, she replied icily. And if you're trying to provoke me, I suggest you find a different approach. That was my first glimpse of her moral code. Beneath the haughty exterior, she wasn't some sadistic creature who killed for sport. Good to know. I nodded as best I could with my shoulders pressed against the wall. All right then, Commander Velis area, right? I'll be sure to remember your name. She didn't respond. Instead, she made a motion near the metal bracer on her wrist, and the cuffs tightened just enough to make me grunt. You won't leave this cell anytime soon, so get comfortable. If you have nothing else to say, I'll leave you to consider your fate. She turned and exited, leaving me in the silent hum of the alien brig once again. By then, I was fairly sure she had no idea just how dangerous I could be. But that was fine by me. When people underestimate you, you can catch them off guard at the best possible moment. And I already sensed that moment would come sooner rather than later. Her voice woke me from a doze sometime later, echoing over the ship-wide intercom. All units, prepare for FTL transition. We are entering a restricted zone. Systems check at 98%. Hyperdrive spool in progress. I could hear subtle undertones of tension. Something about that restricted zone must have worried them, or at least demanded caution. Interesting. Shortly afterward, the door hissed open. A tall figure, this time a male Orith guard, stepped into my cell, leveling an odd-looking plasma weapon at me. Time for a more thorough interrogation, he said in a guttural accent, gesturing for me to stand. Commander's orders. I rose, letting the strain of the cuffs show on my face. The guard prodded me forward with the weapon, guiding me out into a corridor filled with a low, ambient light. Humming instruments lined the walls, and the occasional hiss of steam or flicker of a holographic display reminded me of how advanced their ship was compared to anything I'd seen among most human fleets. They led me to a chamber that smelled faintly of antiseptic. In the center was a metal chair ringed by sensor arrays. A console blinked with multicolored lights along one wall, and there stood Commander Velis area with her arms folded. She gave me a cold glance as the guard forced me to sit in the chair and lock my cuffs into place. State your full name, species, and planet of origin, she said flatly. I'm Darren, I repeated. Human. Planet Earth. Or Terra, if you prefer. You already know that. She gave a slight nod to the guard, who slid a metallic circlet over my head. The interior pressed gently against my temples, and a dizzying wave of static filled my vision. I blinked rapidly to clear it. This device measures truthfulness, the commander explained, stepping forward. Among other things, if you lie, it alerts us. Might be simpler if you just asked politely, I muttered. But by all means, let's do it your way. She ignored that. Why did you come to Orith territory? Because I'm trying to outrun a certain gang of interplanetary mercenaries who'd love to dissect me for what I carry inside, I thought. But out loud, I said, I was looking for work. Cargo runs, maybe. Word on the black market is that Orith pays well for certain supplies. A faint beep sounded from the console. She glanced at the reading, then back at me. True. Yet that's a typical smuggler's route, and your presence in the restricted zone suggests you were searching for something else. What was it? I felt a tightening around my temples. The circlet. They wanted to push me. Perhaps I was bored, I said, forcing a grin that felt hollow. I like living dangerously. A short beep. I couldn't tell if it indicated a lie or an ambiguous answer, but the commander's expression didn't shift. What do you know of Orith technology? Did someone hire you to steal from us? The truth? I knew a lot about Orith tech. I'd spent months researching it after stumbling upon that hidden lab near the fringes of Earth's battered cities. You'd be surprised, I said softly, how many secrets exist in your so-called advanced labs. That earned me the first real reaction from her, a flicker of surprise in her jade eyes. You speak boldly. So you do know more than you're letting on. Are you an agent of some rival government? Alliance espionage, perhaps? I give a tight laugh. The only person I work for is me, Commander. She scanned the console's readings. The beeps sounded neutral enough that she must have concluded I wasn't lying. Interesting, she murmured. Then she deactivated the circlet, stepping closer. Whatever you are, we can't let you roam free. You'll remain confined while I consider your fate. Stop making it sound so ominous, I said, rolling my shoulders painfully against the seat. I might start thinking you actually care. She pressed her lips together, gesturing for the guard to remove me from the chair. Take him back to his cell, she ordered. Make sure the security fields are at maximum. While the guard handled the restraints, I caught one last glimpse of the commander's gaze. She looked perturbed, unsure how to handle me. I recognized that flicker of doubt, that frustration of dealing with a puzzle that refused to be solved. In another situation, I might have pitted her, but for now, I let them haul me away, quietly plotting how I would capitalize on her confusion. My second night on the ship, or what I guess might be night according to the standard Earth clock in my head, was when everything started to go sideways. I was curled up on the uncomfortable bench, listening to the faint hum of electronics that had become a sort of lullaby when red alarm lights illuminated the corridor beyond my cell's force field. Distant shouts echoed from down the hallway. The entire vessel felt like it shuddered, as though something powerful had jolted it off course. I stood, pushing myself against the cell's transparent barrier. There were more alarms now, along with a pulsing siren. Moments later, 2 Orith crew members ran past, barking orders into their comms. Energy flux in the lower deck modules. We can't stabilize the field. Someone kill that override. Suddenly, the lights in my cell blinked. The force field popped with a crackle, reactivated, and then flickered again. My heart rate kicked up a notch. That was it. A sign the ship's system was in crisis. And if the door or the field malfunctioned, even for an instant, I might just get the chance I've been waiting for. Sure enough, a surge of flickering energy rippled through the entire cell block. My barrier vanished briefly, then snapped back. I pressed my hand forward. Another surge, longer this time, gave me the window of opportunity. I stepped through. A wave of triumph swept through me as I stood free in the corridor, no alarm blaring about my cell specifically. The ship was too busy with the meltdown happening wherever that energy flux was. I briefly flexed my wrists, letting circulation return where the cuffs had chafed. Although my ankles were still loosely bound by alien shackles, I had enough freedom to move quickly. I glanced around for any immediate threat. Aside from the flickering lights, the corridor looked abandoned. I could hear more frantic voices from deeper in the ship. Without wasting time, I hurried in the opposite direction, scanning door panels for something like an armory, or at least a storage closet where I could remove these shackles. From the far side of the hall, I spotted a small maintenance hatch. Perfect. Inside was a dimly lit compartment with tool racks and a battered console. It took me a minute to figure out the Orith script, but I'd done my homework on this language. In the faint glow, I navigated through the console's prompts, pulling up the door controls for my ankle restraints. They responded with a soft click, falling free. I exhaled in relief, flexing my feet. Then, from behind me, someone cleared their throat. Instinct jolted me into spinning around, arms raised defensively. There stood an Orith officer with wide, startled eyes. He looked younger than the others, uncertain whether to shoot first or call for backup. A second of silence passed like an eternity. I lunged, grabbing his wrist and forcing his weapon downward. He yelped, but I twisted out of the way as the muzzle flared with a bolt of white plasma that scorched the floor. A swift elbow to his jaw dropped him, leaving him dazed. Panting, I hovered over him briefly, checking if he was conscious. He was out cold, though his vital signs were stable. I wasn't here to kill anybody if I could avoid it. I searched him for a comm device or something that would help me navigate. Instead, I found a small data key in his belt pouch. That might be even better. I stepped back into the corridor, just in time to hear a thunderous crash. Overhead, the alarm changed tone. Security alert in the engineering bay. The ship's AI blared in a metallic voice. Malfunctioning droid unit detected. So that was the cause of all this chaos. A security droid gone rogue, or maybe a whole squad of them. That explained the power surges. The Orith had impressive technology, but I knew from personal research that their advanced robotics could occasionally suffer catastrophic system errors if tampered with, or if exposed to certain signals. Another memory flickered through my mind. The signals I could emit from the augmentations in my right forearm. I suppressed a hint of a grin, recalling just how well those hidden abilities worked when it came to messing with modern hardware. I took another corridor and nearly collided with Commander Veliss area. She had 2 guards flanking her. At first, none of them recognized me in the gloom. My hair stuck to my forehead from the heat of the failing systems. And I'd exchanged my tattered jacket for a standard Orith maintenance vest I'd found in the storage room. But after a second, her eyes widened in shock, then sharpened with anger. "You," she spat, lifting her sidearm. "How did you?" "Commander," I cut in, forcing my voice to sound urgent and not entirely triumphant. "I think we have bigger problems right now." Her finger hovered near the trigger. One of her guards took aim. "Bigger than an escaped prisoner?" she demanded. "You better talk fast." I resisted the urge to grin. Instead, I jerked a thumb down the corridor. "Your entire ship is on the verge of meltdown. One of your droid units is apparently going haywire. Is that my fault too?" She paused, glancing at the flashing emergency lights that turned the corridor crimson. Then she gestured for her guards to keep me covered. "You're still coming with me," she snapped. "If you resist, I'll shoot you here and now." I held up my empty hands. "I'll help if I can," I offered. "I don't fancy being on a ship that explodes, especially if I'm stuck aboard. And I do know a thing or two about your systems." Her lips pressed into a tight line. "Why would you help us?" I let out a breath, try to convey exasperation. "Because I want off this vessel in one piece. I can't do that if half the corridors are on fire and your droid is blasting holes in the hull." She gave me a calculating look. Her eyes flicked momentarily to her guards. "Fine, but you stay in front. If I even suspect you're trying something, I'll pull the trigger without hesitation." That was better than I'd expected, so I simply nodded. "Lead the way," I said, aware of her ill-disguised fury. She expected me to flinch or cower. Instead, I stepped ahead, scanning the chaotic environment. Wisps of smoke curled through the halls where electrical fires had sparked. Screams and shouts echoed from behind sealed doors. The starboard side of the ship was in particularly bad shape. We passed a room with flickering wall screens displaying frantic status reports. Hyperdrive offline. Primary energy node collapsed. The meltdown seemed dangerously close. Veliss beckoned me into an elevator of sorts that took us 3 decks down, near engineering. The door slid open onto a scene from a sci-fi nightmare. Twisted metal, shattered panels, and arcs of electricity dancing over a collapsed catwalk. At the center of it all, a security droid, a huge, spider-like machine, stomached into some control station as if trying to merge with it. Sparks flew from the station's console, and the mechanical arms of the droid jerked erratically, flinging molten shards in every direction. A half-dozen Orith technicians cowered behind debris, weapons drawn, but useless. "Shut that thing down," the commander shouted. She fired a precision shot from her sidearm. The bolt glanced off the droid's reinforced plating, leaving little more than a scorch mark. One of its limbs twisted toward us, releasing a barrage of plasma that sizzled overhead. We ducked behind an overturned crate. One of the guards let out a nervous hiss. "We tried standard overrides, Commander," he panted. "It's not responding. The meltdown is tied to its data core. We can't stop the meltdown without stopping it first." She glanced at me, anger warring with desperation in her eyes. "If you can do anything," she snapped, "do it now. Or I'll see that you're vaporized once this is over." I stifled a cynical retort. Instead, I edged around the crate, scanning the droid. I recognized the faint pulses of Orith design. It was powered by a delicate lattice of fusion cells that interfaced with their broader shipboard network, typically unstoppable once they glitched out. But I had a trick up my sleeve. My own forearm implants were designed to disrupt such advanced connections, injecting a surge of false data that would scramble a logic core. The problem was that I need to get close enough to physically touch the droid's hull and override its circuit. Cover me, I told Valis. I have to make contact with it. She narrowed her eyes. That's suicide. Then so be it, I said with a tight shrug. But unless you'd rather watch your ship break apart, I suggest you shoot at anything that might aim for me. I sprang up before she could argue and sprinted along the jagged floor, dodging sparks. The droid lurched, swiveling its massive body to fire another volley of plasma. I felt the heat was past my ear, singeing the vest I'd stolen. One more step, and I'd be in range. I could hear the commander barking orders behind me, telling her guards to draw the droid's fire. They responded by unleashing a barrage of their own. The spider-like machine reeled back, giving me the precious second I needed. I lunged forward and pressed my palm against a small gap in the droid's plating. Summoning the mental command that activated my implants, I felt a jolt surge from my forearm. A turquoise glow flickered beneath my skin, and the droid convulsed, metal limbs thrashing. Lines of alien code streamed through my mind's eye as I wrestled with the machine's logic core. My breath caught in my throat. It was fighting me, trying to override my own override. Sweat beaded on my forehead. Then, with a final spike of energy, I forced a shut-down command. The droid convulsed one last time, then went still, collapsing into a heap of smoldering wreckage. A wave of electric discharge crackled over the console it had been fused with, and a meltdown alarm cut off in mid-scream. The floor beneath us rumbled as the power flow stabilized, and the overhead lights flickered back to steady white. My knees buckled, exhaustion washing over me, but I managed to remain upright. An eerie silence followed. Crew members peered out from their hiding spots, eyes wide with disbelief. Valis stepped forward slowly, her weapon still in hand. Her expression was almost unreadable. Fear, yes, but also a trace of awe. She had realized, in those seconds, that I possessed technology or a skill set beyond anything she had suspected. Something that let me neutralize what her entire crew couldn't contain. I stayed where I was, panting, palms still resting on the droid's armor. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then Valis holstered her weapon with a shaky exhale. Her eyes burned into mine. "What in the name of the Orith Sons are you?" she demanded, voice trembling with pent-up tension. I flexed my hand and forced myself to step away from the charred metal. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you the full story," I said. "And you probably wouldn't like it, either." Her guards approached with caution, one of them raising his sidearm. Valis lifted a hand, signaling him to stand down. "You single-handedly prevented a meltdown that could have destroyed the ship," she said quietly. "But you also escaped confinement. And I suspect you triggered some of these malfunctions." "I might have," I admitted, though I kept my tone careful. "It wasn't intended to kill anyone. Just gave your systems a little push. I had to create a distraction so I could escape. But then it got out of hand." She laughed, a short, humorless sound. "We nearly paid for your tactics with our lives." I met her gaze. So did I. We stood there, locked in a stare. The hostility between us still radiated, but something else mixed in now, an odd, reluctant respect. I had no illusions. She was still the commanding officer, with an entire crew behind her, but she understood that the dynamic had shifted. I wasn't just a puny human inmate anymore. At length, she motioned for me to follow. "Don't try running," she warned. "You're still a prisoner on this ship. But for now, it seems I need you." I resisted the urge to smirk. "Commander Valis Area," I said softly as we walked past the ruined droid. "I'm glad you're realizing that I'm not quite helpless." She didn't respond, but her rigid posture spoke volumes. I could all but feel her distrust intensifying, overshadowed only by her concern for her ship and her crew. There was an underlying question haunting her now. If I could do this to a malfunctioning droid, what else might I be capable of? And how would they ever contain me if I turned on them fully? Over the next few hours, the crew worked frantically to bring the ship's systems back online. I stood awkwardly in a corner of the engineering bay, guarded by an Orith soldier who kept his weapon aimed at my chest, though his eyes darted nervously to the melted husk of the security droid. Meanwhile, Valis shouted orders at her subordinates, directing them to reroute power, patch holes, and vent any pockets of superheated gas. The tension was palpable. Every so often, one of the crew would glance my way with suspicion or fear. No one dared to talk to me, not unless the commander was present. Eventually, they stabilized the reactors and sealed the compromised sections of the hull. A hush spread across the corridors as the main lights returned to normal. During that relative calm, a few murmurs of relief passed among the crew. Some cast me grateful looks. Others eyed me like I was a live explosive waiting to detonate. I wasn't sure which reaction unsettled me more. The guard nudged me with his rifle. "Move," he said. I obliged, letting him escort me through the labyrinth of hallways, back toward an upper deck where a set of executive cabins were located. Now that the meltdown was contained, it seemed the commander had chosen a more comfortable location to address my status. I half expected them to toss me in another cell, but instead, we arrived at a spacious briefing room. Its curved walls displayed a holographic star map of local sectors, luminous points marking trade routes and restricted zones. At the center was a broad table with sleek black chairs. Commander Valis stood behind it, arms folded, her posture taut. She waved the guard away, instructing him to wait outside. Then she gestured for me to sit. I hesitated. This was the first time I'd been offered a seat anywhere outside a prison bench. Warily, I settled into the chair, the material forming gently around my body in a strangely comfortable way. "You saved my ship from destruction," she said, getting straight to the point, "and possibly orchestrated the crisis in the first place. You're not who you claim to be." I took a moment to think through my response. "I never claimed to be anything in particular," I pointed out. "You assumed I was just another smuggler." She arched one eyebrow. "And you let me assume it. Would you have believed me if I told you from the start about these abilities?" I asked, tapping the faint lines of circuitry beneath my sleeve. The skin was still warm from channeling that override surge. Her gaze flicked to my arm. "So it's true? You carry cybernetic implants?" "Of a sort," I said quietly. "They're beyond typical human tech, if that's what you're wondering. A lot of it is experimental, or at least it was. Let's just say I didn't sign up voluntarily. There was a lab on Earth, well-funded, not entirely official. I was a convenient test subject." She lowered herself into the chair across from me, resting her elbows on the table. Her expression softened by a fraction, tinged with curiosity. "And these implants let you disrupt our systems?" "They let me interface with them, sometimes forcibly," I corrected. "What I did to your droid was basically a forced shutdown command. But I can also hack networks if needed, though that's not as easy as flipping a switch. It can backfire." I paused. "Commander, I don't want to be your enemy." I triggered that meltdown as a distraction, not realizing how severe it would become. "I didn't want your people dead." She studied me for a long moment, searching my face for sincerity. Then she said, "If that's true, then you owe us a more direct explanation. Were you sent here by someone? Is there a faction that wants Orth technology?" I shook my head. "I'm just trying to stay alive. I found out that a certain group of mercenaries wanted to capture me, harvest my implants, and replicate them. Their leader had ties to the Orth. So I figured if I got into Orth space, I might throw them off my trail, or at least find a safe place to negotiate. Clearly, I was wrong." She leaned back. "Mercenaries might have the means to challenge you, but not legally. You were hoping we'd protect you just because you showed up on our doorstep? Or maybe I was hoping to cut a deal," I said. "Offer my knowledge in exchange for asylum. It's a gamble, I know." Valis sighed, rubbing the bridge of her nose. "And then we treated you like a petty criminal." She paused, looking troubled. "You must understand, humans who wander into Orth territory usually come as scavengers or smugglers. Our alliance sees them as a nuisance." I gave a short laugh. "No offense taken. I can understand how it looked from your perspective. But from where I stand, you're the ones with the resources and power. I was just trying not to get dissected." She pursed her lips. "And now you've proven yourself more dangerous than any normal human I've encountered. That's what makes me uneasy." I tapped my fingertips against the table, a restless habit. "I can't deny I'm a threat if I choose to be. But if I wanted to sabotage your ship or kill your crew, I could have. Instead, I saved it from a meltdown. That should count for something. It counts, she said, her tone grudgingly respectful. Then her eyes hardened again. But it doesn't erase the risks. I have a duty to uphold Orith law, and you being here, implant or not, puts me in a difficult position. The best I can do for now is keep you contained under guard. I inclined my head, acknowledging that was likely the most lenient approach she could take. You do what you must, Commander. I won't resist as long as your people don't try to dissect me, either. She offered a mirthless smile. We do not practice vivisection on conscious beings, if that's your concern. But I'd be lying if I said our scientists wouldn't be interested in studying you. For now, though, let's keep them away. Perhaps we can resolve this without further chaos. A silent moment stretched between us. I wondered if she was questioning her own instincts, how she felt about capturing me, a being who wasn't truly an enemy but definitely not an ally. And if I was honest with myself, I'd begun to see something in her I hadn't expected, a certain code of honor beneath the stern exterior. It almost made me feel guilty for causing the meltdown. Almost. Eventually, she stood and motioned for me to follow. I'll assign you quarters under guard, she explained. Not a cell, but you'll be monitored at all times. Don't try any more stunts. I rose, feeling my legs protest from the earlier strain of sprinting across the engineering deck. I'll behave, Commander. Just keep your end of the bargain. No labs, no dissection. She led me out into the corridor, her posture stiff. As we walked, a few crew members peered at me with wide eyes, whispering among themselves. I caught fragments. That's him, the one who, or commanders letting him roam? Each snippet hammered home the fact that I was now a curiosity among them, potentially a monster. Yet I sensed a change in Velissa's demeanor. She was no longer spitting curses or hurling threats. She'd seen what I was capable of, and the realization unsettled her. The alien woman who once thought I was helpless now struggled with a new question. If I could break her ship system so easily, what else could I do? The next day, I spent in a cramped set of guest quarters presumably meant for dignitaries under tight supervision. A guard posted outside the door, cameras in the corners, minimal furniture. But it was still a far cry from my previous cell. I even had a small viewport looking out onto the star-flecked void. I watched galaxies drift past, feeling the subtle tremor of the ship's engines as we traveled at sub-FTL speeds. They were presumably making repairs to the hyperdrive, which had been damaged during the meltdown fiasco. I also had time to think. The risk of those mercenaries finding me still loomed. If the Orith vessel was forced to dock somewhere for major repairs, it might give my pursuers a chance to catch up. That would be catastrophic, not just for me, but for the entire crew. The mercs were brutal and well-equipped. My best shot at survival might actually be forging an alliance with Velis, helping her fix the ship or offering enough intel to earn her genuine protection. And yet, I wasn't sure I could trust that she wouldn't toss me into a lab the moment it was convenient. The Orith Alliance's moral code remained an unknown. Midway through that silent morning, a knock sounded at the door. I stood as it slid open. Commander Velis stepped in, unaccompanied. No guard by her side. That surprised me more than I cared to admit. She let the door close behind her. "You've been cooperative," she said, crossing her arms over her chest. She was out of her usual battle gear, wearing a simpler uniform that revealed more of those metallic-like scales on her arms and neck. "No attempts to hack our systems since last night." I nodded, trying not to stare. Her presence was formidable even without the armor. "I gave my word," I said quietly. "I don't go back on that." She approached the viewport, gaze drifting to the stars. "We're stuck at cruising speed for at least another cycle while we finish hyperdrive repairs. After that, we'll head for an Orith outpost to restock and finalize repairs. You'll come with us." I felt a twinge of dread. An outpost, meaning a place full of Orith officials who might want to poke at me. She glanced back. "It's either that, or we abandon you on some uninhabited planet, which would be equivalent to a death sentence. Are you so eager to see us gone?" A humorless laugh escaped me. "I'm not eager for that, but I'm not thrilled about parading myself in front of your superiors either. If they realize what I can do, they'll have the same reaction I did," she said curtly. Fear, distrust, maybe even wanting to detain you long term. But there's a chance we can negotiate. If you demonstrate your willingness to cooperate, that might help. My instincts told me that negotiate was a convenient euphemism for we might confine you anyway, but at least the accommodations would be better. Still, I also understood that I had little choice. All right, I said, but if things go south, I'm not going to quietly let myself be chained to a table. Something flickered in her eyes, anger, or maybe admiration. It was hard to parse. I realize that now, she admitted. You're not the first human I've encountered, but you are the first who genuinely scares me. Congratulations on that. I let out a slow breath, leaning against the wall. For what it's worth, Commander, it's not my intention to frighten you. I never asked for these implants. But you can't deny they've come in handy for your crew. She studied me for a moment, then stepped closer. No, I can't deny that. Her gaze flicked down to my forearm, where faint lines of circuit-like patterns wove under the skin. What you did in engineering, you could have walked away, left us to deal with the meltdown alone. Instead, you saved us. I didn't want to see your people die, I said honestly. And it's not like I'd benefit from a burning wreck anyway. Pragmatic, she murmured. Then she fell silent for a few seconds, as though wrestling with an internal conflict. If we're going to share this ship until the outpost, we might as well try to avoid another meltdown. Is there anything else I need to know about your abilities? I weighed how much to reveal. Finally, I said, I can sense and manipulate certain frequencies that advanced systems rely on. Think of it like a Wi-Fi network, but more invasive. My body has a built-in processor that can interpret signals and overwrite them. I don't need an external device, but I do need physical proximity or at least a direct line to the system. It drains me mentally and physically, so I can't just wave my hand and shut down everything. Also, if I push too far, I risk frying my own implants. A ghost of a wry smile touched her lips. That might be a relief in a twisted way. At least you have some limitations. I let the faintest chuckle escape. Nobody is limitless, Commander. She regarded me quietly, then turned back to the viewport. You once asked me why we didn't just kill you. The truth is, my people's laws forbid executing prisoners without trial. Even with everything that's happened, I can't just dispose of you. Which means we'll keep dancing this delicate line, fearing your potential, yet relying on you when necessary. Seems like it, I agreed, feeling a twinge of sympathy for her predicament. Must be exhausting. Her mouth tightened. Yes, she said simply, but I'll endure it. My responsibility is to keep this crew safe. We stood there for a while, neither of us speaking. The tension that roiled beneath our earlier conversations felt subdued, replaced by a tentative calm. Commander Valisaria was afraid of me, maybe not in a cowering sense, but enough to treat me like a living weapon that might go off at any second. And I couldn't entirely blame her. This was the reality of what I'd become. A human augmented with technology that wasn't meant for mere mortals, carrying secrets that threatened to shake alliances. Eventually, she left, and I was alone again. I stared at the stars, replaying the last few days in my mind. She thought I was helpless once, back when I was chained in that cell. Now she knew better. In the grand scheme of the universe, I wasn't the strongest being out there, but on this ship, among these unsuspecting Orith, I had an edge. That frightened her enough to wonder what else I might do. But fear wasn't always a bad thing. Fear could keep people alive. And if it meant she wouldn't dare turn me over to some lab without a second thought, then perhaps that fear would keep me alive as well. Together, we'd face whatever came next, Orith outpost or mercenary raid. It wouldn't be easy, but at least I wasn't alone in the darkness of space, waiting for death. And for now, that would have to be enough. When the ship finally approached the outpost, the hyperdrive had been partially restored. I felt the FDL jump ripple through my bones, an electric hum coursing under the decks. Outside my quarters, the guard stiffened, bracing himself against the wall. Even with the repairs, the transition felt rough. A slight groan reverberated through the hull, but we emerged on the other side in one piece, a testament to the engineering team's hard work. The outpost hovered near a pale green star, ringed by swirling cosmic dust. On approach, it looked like a small city suspended in emptiness. Towering spires, multiple docking platforms, the faint glow of shield generators. My heart pounded as I peered through the viewport. This would be the moment of truth. Commander Velis had informed me that we'd be docking for at least 2 days, maybe more, depending on resource availability. She'd strongly implied that I'd remain on the ship unless her superiors insisted otherwise. I wasn't sure whether to pray they'd leave me alone or brace for an eventual confrontation. The docking clamps locked onto the ship, and a subtle shudder signaled we were stationary. Then came the overhead announcement. All essential personnel prepare for disembarkation procedures. Non-essential crew remain on standby. Medical and engineering teams report to airlock with commander area for supply transfer. I heard footsteps in the corridor, the hustle of Orith officers heading to greet the outpost staff. Soon, the door to my quarters slid open, revealing Velis flanked by 2 guards. She wore a crisp uniform again, and her expression was impassive. "We've arrived," she said. "I expect you to stay here, under guard, while I handle negotiations with the outpost authorities. If they demand to see you, I'll send for you." "Understood." I nodded. "Understood." She hesitated a moment. "If something goes wrong, stay put. Don't tamper with anything. The last thing we need is more chaos." "I promise not to blow up your ship while you're gone," I said dryly. Her eyes flicked in annoyance, or was it faint amusement? "Very well." Then she left with her entourage, leaving me once again to the not-so-tender mercies of a single guard. The guard, to his credit, kept a stoic silence, occasionally checking the corridor as though expecting trouble. Hours passed. The ship felt oddly empty now that many crew members had disembarked. Through the viewport, I glimpsed the shimmering hull of the outpost docking bay, lit by overhead strips of bright white light. My mind churned with possibilities. Could I escape here? Slip off the ship and disappear among the crowds of aliens? But that might just land me in an even more vulnerable position if the outpost authorities recognized me as a suspicious fugitive. There was also the question of whether the mercenaries were out there, tracking me across the galaxy. If it arrived first, stepping off this ship could be a death sentence. So I remained. Another hour, maybe 2. My guard shifted his weight repeatedly, eyes darting to me as if to make sure I hadn't magically evaporated. Then something beeped on his communicator. He lifted it, listened, and frowned. "Commander wants me at the airlock," he muttered. "She said we're short-staffed with cargo." He spared me a nervous glance. "Will you behave if I leave you alone?" I spread my hands in a gesture of innocence. "You have my word, soldier." He considered my answer, clearly torn. But the communicator beeped again, more urgently. With a worried sigh, he tapped the door panel, stepped out, and locked it behind him. The hiss of the magnetic seal indicated I was once more sealed in my quarters. That was fine. I wasn't looking for trouble, not yet. Another wave of silence enveloped me as footsteps faded away. I wondered how the negotiations were going. Perhaps everything was routine. The Orith outpost staff scanning cargo, verifying the meltdown damage, agreeing to supply parts. Or maybe they discovered that their visitors were harboring a human with dangerous implants. My imagination conjured 100 scenarios, each more ominous than the last. After what felt like half a day, the door slid open again. This time, Velis entered alone, no guards in sight. She appeared visibly tense, shoulders stiff, eyes brighter than usual. There was a sheen of sweat on her brow. She sealed the door behind her. "What happened?" I asked, stepping forward. "You look like—" She held up a hand to silence me. "We have a problem," she said, voice hushed but urgent. "I've just learned that a group of unidentified mercenaries landed at the outpost a few hours before us. The descriptions, they matched the profile of the ones you warned me about." My stomach twisted. "They're here." She nodded tightly. "They're asking questions. They claim they're seeking a fugitive who stole experimental technology." I let out a shaky breath. "They want me. Did you tell the outpost staff anything?" Her jaw clenched. "I had to explain you're in custody, but I didn't detail your implants. They suspect you might be the fugitive those mercenaries want, but I've convinced the outpost to keep it quiet for the moment." The mercenaries can't force Orth officials to hand over any prisoner without an official warrant, and they don't have one. They're working off the record. I felt a grim relief that she protected me so far. But I read the concern in her eyes. They might try to infiltrate the ship or sabotage it, I said softly. She pressed her lips together. Exactly. I'm preparing to depart as soon as we finish restocking. The outpost officials are cooperating, but I can't control what these mercenaries do outside Orth jurisdiction. You should be ready. If they board the ship looking for you, you may have to defend yourself. A wave of conflicting emotions crashed over me. Valis Area, the woman who once taunted me as an insignificant prisoner, was now warning me of danger and telling me to prepare. Commander, I murmured, why are you risking your neck for me? You could just as easily hand me over. Her gaze locked on mine. I've seen what you can do. I'm not about to give you to mercenaries who'd weaponize that. Besides, she added, her voice quieter, you saved my crew's lives. I'm not in the habit of repaying loyalty with betrayal. A knot formed in my chest. I gave a curt nod. Thank you. She brushed past me, heading for the viewport as if needing something to focus on besides my gratitude. Don't thank me yet. This is a dangerous game we're playing. I don't know how it'll end. It ends with us leaving here before those mercenaries can corner us, I said. I'll do whatever you need to ensure we can depart safely. She glanced over her shoulder, a spark of determination in her eyes. Glad to hear it, because I suspect the moment they realize you're on board, they'll try something drastic. And the last thing I want is another meltdown triggered by your implants. I managed a half smile. I'll be careful, I promise. She inhaled slowly, then nodded. All right, I need to organize the final supply run and expedite the outpost formalities. In the meantime, you stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but me or my authorized officers. I can do that, I said, bowing my head slightly. She lingered for a heartbeat, as though wanting to say more, but then she spun on her heel and left. The door hissed shut behind her, reactivating the lock. Once again, I was alone, but this time my heart beat faster. My life balanced on a razor's edge. I had no illusions that the mercenaries wouldn't kill me the second they got the chance, then carve out my implants for resale on the black market. The difference now was that Commander Valis seemed genuinely willing to stand between them and me. The question was whether that would be enough. Sinking onto the small cot in the corner, I ran a hand through my hair and exhaled shakily. So this was how it all culminated. The alien woman who once jeered at my helplessness now realized the truth of my hidden power, enough that she feared both me and the potential ramifications if I fell into the wrong hands. Yet she chose to protect me, guided by a sense of honor I found oddly comforting. I wondered if, in time, that fear might grow into respect, maybe even trust. But for now, we would remain uneasy allies in a cosmos that had little room for mercy. My only solace lay in the fact that I wasn't truly alone anymore. Valis was afraid of me, yes, but fear sometimes forged bonds stronger than friendship. Because as long as she dreaded what I might become if betrayed, she had reason to stand by my side. And in the silent hush of the outpost docking bay, as the ship prepared for swift departure, I could only pray that my presence brought her more hope than destruction. I closed my eyes, listening to the distant clangs of cargo being loaded. The line between enemy and ally had blurred beyond recognition, but maybe that was the only way we survived in this unforgiving universe. One thing was certain. The alien woman thought I was helpless once. Now she understood otherwise. And perhaps that realization would keep us both alive, fighting side by side, instead of tearing each other apart. I had to believe it would be enough. If not, the coming confrontation with the mercenaries would show us just how fleeting illusions of safety could be, and which of us was truly helpless in the end.